This is The Quiet End, and tonight I'll tell you a story titled Echoes of the First Light. Let's begin! Between the steel walls of the Helios Observatory, where innovation clung desperately to ambition, a team of astronomers found themselves poised on the brink of history. For months, they had hunted for anomalies in their deep scans of the cosmos, patterns etched into waves of light so ancient it was believed they predated the Big Bang itself. Then, on a humid Tuesday that seemed no more important than the ones that came before, the signal emerged. At first, it appeared faint, indecipherable, a whisper lost in a storm of static. But as they applied their algorithms, what unraveled left seasoned minds shaking in their seats. The signal was too rhythmic, too deliberate. It carried complexity. Lee, the youngest of the team, was the first to say it out loud. It sounds like whispers, actual whispers. Though his phrasing drew quiet scoffs, no one could entirely dismiss the notion, not when layered audio analysis revealed undulating patterns resembling language. Celebration quickly replaced skepticism. The discovery defied every known barrier of scientific understanding. They had heard the echoes of a light older than existence itself. The observatory became a kinetic blur of activity. Calls were made, equations sprawled across every available surface. The atmosphere hummed with raw, intellectual electricity. But not everyone shared the enthusiasm. William, a quiet yet imposing figure among their ranks, leaned over the console and whispered, "Patterns don't happen by chance. This wasn't random. Someone chose to send this." His words fell like lead, dragging a thin veil of doubt over the room. None could argue, none dared. And yet, the team resolved to push forward, to risk everything and decode those whispers. What they didn't realize then was this: the knowledge they chased wasn't merely forbidden, it was alive. Weeks passed, and the team's initial triumph began to feel like a distant memory, eclipsed by the strange and unrelenting presence of the signal. The whispers that had captivated their minds now seemed louder, more intrusive. It was Carl, the observatory's linguistics expert, who first confessed. He reported hearing a voice, low, deliberate, enticing in the hushed stillness of the night. It claimed to hold secrets of creation, truths too vast for the human mind to comprehend unaided. The signal, it seemed, was no mere artifact. It was sentient, and it wanted them to listen. At first, his colleagues dismissed these claims as stress-induced delusions. After all, sleepless nights were becoming the norm. But then James, the ever-practical mathematician, began reporting similar experiences, his voice wavering as he admitted to scribbling equations he didn't remember understanding, let alone writing. The others stayed silent, but their weary eyes betrayed them. No one was immune. Dreams became battlegrounds, vivid and suffocating. In those dreams, the voice wasn't just a sound. It had weight, shape, a presence that pressed upon them like a cosmic tide threatening to pull them under. It spoke of enlightenment, promised an escape from ignorance and death, luring them closer to some great and unspeakable revelation. Yet with each promise, the cost loomed larger, though none could yet articulate its shape. One night, Lewis woke from a fitful half-sleep, clutching his ears. He swore he heard not just whispers, but a choir. Thousands, no, millions of voices speaking in unison, not to him, but through him. Nobody in the room, not Will, not Richard, not even William, could say they hadn't heard it too. What had started as exhilaration was twisting into dread. Their discovery was no longer a question of knowledge, but of survival. Dr. Eliza Wren had always been a beacon of rationality among the team, her mind sharp and unyielding, dissecting problems with precision and grace. But the signal changed her. As the whispers grew louder, Eliza began claiming the voice wasn't a threat, but a guide, a teacher beckoning her to unlock truths humanity was never meant to comprehend. She spent hours, days, fixated on decoding its intricate patterns, her fingers trembling as she scribbled diagrams and symbols that resembled nothing from any recognized language or science. At first, her colleagues chalked it up to brilliance. Eliza had always been tireless, relentless, her obsession serving as the driving force behind their progress. But soon it was clear there was something darker beneath her fervor. She stopped sleeping entirely, muttering to herself in strange cadences, her eyes shadowed and hollow. The others began noticing erratic behavior in themselves as well. Carl's hands shook whenever he wasn't near the signal data. James began shouting equations as if possessed, and Lewis whispered cryptic fragments in languages none of them understood. Eliza, however, was no longer merely erratic. She was slipping away. One night, William walked into her lab to find her staring into a monitor, her lips moving silently, her expression one of an unsettling reverence. On the screen, patterns of light pulsed, forming shapes he swore looked unnervingly like eyes staring back at her. "Eliza, we need to stop," he pleaded, desperation clinging to his voice. "This signal, whatever it is corrupting us." She didn't look away. Her voice was quiet, cold. "Corruption is the price of enlightenment, William. I see now it's been waiting for us, for me." When she finally turned to him, her expression froze him where he stood. She didn't look like Eliza anymore. There was something alien in her gaze, as if pieces of her humanity had unraveled, replaced by something older, something vast. And yet, none of them could resist the pull. The signal had burrowed so deeply into their minds that walking away felt impossible. Day by day, they succumbed further to compulsive behaviors, their work less about discovery and more about appeasement. Whatever sent the signal was watching them, guiding them, and now it was waiting and hungry. The cracks in the team's sanity were no longer subtle. They were chasms, widening with each passing hour. The once pristine halls of the Helios Observatory now echoed with whispers, murmured equations, and the panicked shuffle of footsteps. They began seeing things, impossible landscapes stretching infinitely across their monitors, rippling with alien geometries that felt as if they could pull reality inside out. Rolling black skies, punctuated with lights that seemed not to shine, but to consume everything around them. One by one, the researchers described creatures drifting across these vistas, creatures whose shapes defied logic, their forms shifting before the mind could comprehend. Spindly limbs, countless eyes, and mouths that didn't remain mouths for long. It wasn't just on the screens, the visions bled into every corner. Carl swore he saw shadows stretching unnaturally long across the ceilings. Louis found shapes carved into the walls that no one else could see, though he insisted on their presence so feverishly that his nails turned raw from scraping. Then there were the voices. The whispers were no longer confined to the data streams. They echoed endlessly, taking root in their skulls, blurring the lines between thoughts and intrusions. Lee, barely holding himself together, screamed during a late-night analysis, hurling his chair across the lab. When the others rushed to him, they found his eyes wild, darting between them as if they were strangers. "It's not just guiding us," he gasped. "It's rewriting us." The unrest escalated into violence. James, usually quiet and collected, shoved Carl with such force that his head struck the edge of a console, all because of a disagreement over the purpose of a single fragment of the signal. While others pulled them apart, they saw it in James's eyes, the helpless rage of a man who knew his actions were no longer entirely his own. Chaos became the rule. Rational thought drowned beneath the waves of the voice, growing louder with every moment, saturating their fragile minds like water filling a sinking ship. And still, no one left the observatory. Not even William, who once insisted they stop. Because by now they all shared a singular, unspoken terror. If they stopped listening, it would find them anyway. Dr. Eliza Wren had barely left the lab in days. Her once meticulous notes had descended into frenzied scrawls, diagrams overlapping pages like desperate attempts to cage an incomprehensible truth. By now, even those who dared look at her work found themselves unsettled, not by what they saw, but by the gnawing sense that the marks she made were alive. Then it happened. Eliza stood before the others, frail but triumphant, and declared, "I've deciphered part of it." A tense pall gripped the room. The whispers seemed to pause for just an instant, as though whatever had sent them was waiting. Her chalkboard was a sprawling nightmare of equations, cryptic glyphs, and nonlinear sketches that bent the eyes if stared at too long. She pointed to the largest of the symbols, its curves sharp and impossibly precise. "These," she began, her voice trembling between exhilaration and terror, "are messages about the origin of existence." She spun around to face them, clutching a crumpled sheaf of notes. "There are entities, beings older than light itself. They dwell beyond the boundary of what we call our universe. in a realm where form and time and reason do not exist. Her description grew fevered. Through jagged breaths, she spoke of visions given to her by the signal, visions of a place vast and pulsating, where the air was thick with the screams of light being devoured. The entities, she said, were boundless and exquisite, yet defined by their hunger, their unending need to consume light and life everywhere the two could be found. Her colleagues recoiled at first, horrified by her words, but as she read deeper pieces of her findings aloud, something began to shift. They felt it like a hook beneath the skin, pulling them closer and closer. What horrified them more? The terrible truth in her words, or their own inability to look away. The scribbles and diagrams no longer seemed alien. In fact, the longer they stared, the more they recognized their shapes, the echoes of something familiar inside themselves, as though they had always known. Eliza gripped the final page in her hand. Her voice broke as she whispered, "They didn't just send the signal, they've been listening." Dr. Malik had always carried an air of quiet confidence, the kind that had once grounded the team when tensions rose. But now, his calm had curdled into unsettling conviction. He no longer fought the whispers. He welcomed them, claimed they were guiding him towards something greater, something no fragile human mind could resist or comprehend. It was late when he made his declaration. Standing in the center of the cramped lab, surrounded by flickering monitors drenched in the signal's hypnotic patterns, Malik whispered to the others, his voice strained and hollow. "I will offer myself," he said, "so it may speak through me. To understand, we must give something in return. It's what it demands." The team froze, the weight of his words pressing down on their already fragile minds. Carl shook his head, realizing far too late how far gone Malik truly was. "This is madness. Pull yourself together," he shouted, but his voice rang hollow. Malik turned to them, his gaze distant yet resolute. "It's not madness. It's clarity. It's everything." Before anyone could stop him, Malik stepped into the center of the room, directly in front of the main console where the signal pulsed in spiraling fractal patterns. And then he was gone. No scream, no sound. One moment he stood drenched in light. The next, the air seemed to warp, shimmering as if stretched thin before snapping back into silence. All that remained was a scorched trail across the lab floor, a twisting series of burned spirals that mimicked the signal's intricate structure with haunting precision. The team stared at the burned patterns, an unspoken terror rattling through each of them. It was Eliza who muttered the truth none of them wanted to admit. It's not just watching, it's feeding, and it needs offerings. At that moment, the room filled with whispers, louder and closer than ever, threading their way through flesh and bone, and from somewhere deep in those thousands of overlapping voices, a single word emerged. One. They weren't finished. Something still waited, something hungry. It began with the lights, the dazzling glow of the Helios Observatory, once a sanctuary for discovery, flickered and faded to an oppressive murk. Shadows grew where there should have been none, swelling and curling like living tendrils, dancing in unnatural patterns. Then came the darkness, a writhing, absolute black that spilled forth like ink across the walls, floors, and ceilings, defying every rule of light and space. The signal wasn't confined to the consoles anymore. It was everywhere, twisting through the air, vibrating beneath their feet, manifesting in shapes that moved like sentient parasites. "We're unraveling," Carl muttered, his voice razor-thin as he backed into a corner, clutching his arm like it could anchor him. His vision darted wildly, trying to track the motion of the shadows that crept steadily toward him. Then, the voice spoke. Not whispers now, but a deep resonance that poured through each researcher's mind as though their skulls were nothing but hollow vessels for its sound. "Join the consumed," it urged in tones neither merciful nor malicious, simply inevitable. Eliza, her humanity flickering like a candle fighting the gale, stepped forward. She had stopped resisting long ago. Her gaze was fixed on the darkness as it twisted into the familiar spiraling shapes of the signal's patterns. Her voice came as a soft surrender. "Take me." The shadows engulfed her, swallowing her whole with an uncanny grace. She didn't scream. She didn't even grimace. She simply dissolved, leaving behind faint, glowing symbols etched onto the floor, the same spirals Malik's offering had left. Not everyone gave themselves willingly. Lewis screamed as the tendrils wrapped around his ankles, pulling him into the void despite his frantic clawing at the ground. His cries turned to incoherent babbling, then to silence as his body became part of the darkness, a subtle ripple lost to the growing abyss. James watched, frozen, as the shadows surrounded him but didn't consume him. Yet, in the end, no corner of the observatory remained untouched. The voice swept through them all, oppressive and insistent, driving even the strongest minds to collapse beneath its weight. William, the last to resist, stared into the writhing void, its spirals now glowing faintly across every surface. His hands shook with the weight of final choices, and as the tendrils reached toward him, the voice whispered a promise, something so ancient, so undeniable, that he closed his eyes and stepped forward. The Helios Observatory fell silent. Dr. Eliza Wren stood alone, though the word alone felt meaningless here. The shadows had relented, their writhing tendrils forming a jagged corridor that led her forward, deeper into the void that had consumed the observatory. At the end of the path, it waited. The entity defied scale, a gargantuan mass of staggering contradictions, light and shadow fused into an undulating titan that pulsed with an ancient rhythm. Its surface writhed with spiraling patterns, ever-changing, yet somehow familiar. It wasn't merely alive, it was life. The voice spoke, but not in whispers now. It thundered through the emptiness, each word burrowing directly into her mind, stripping away the last threads of her resistance. The first light, it intoned, was a mistake, an aberration that defied the primal dark. It was never meant to be. What you call creation is theft. Tears streamed silently down Eliza's face, not out of fear, but something far deeper, an instinctive grief she couldn't name. The entity's words rang with an unshakable truth that shattered every framework she had ever known. It surged closer, its vast form towering over her like the womb of a dying cosmos, and offered its final command: the light must return. She understood then, in a way words could never capture. To destroy the first light was not an act of malice, it was restoration. Her trembling hands reached toward the entity, and as the spirals enveloped her, her form dissolved into its lightless embrace. No scream, no pain, just stillness. The Helios Observatory evaporated, not destroyed, but unmade. The space where it had once stood was now silent and empty, as if it had never been. But the signal remained. It spread like a whisper through metal veins, detectable across the world, a faint, spiraling pattern humming in the deepest corners of existence. And for those who heard it, the promise was clear. Enlightenment, the voice called, awaits. If you dare. So tell me, dear listener, if the signal ever calls to you in the dead of night, will you dare to listen, or will it already be too late? Subscribe for more chilling tales, and hit the bell to stay in the dark. See you at the next Quiet End.